Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Just take a few moments. I know it takes just a few seconds for everybody to get admitted. My name is Jackie Eaton. I see some names very familiar to me and others that I've not had the pleasure of meeting before, so thank you for joining us. My role at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute is the Community Action Program for Children Training and Education Coordinator. And I've been at the Prevention Institute for just over 13 years and love what we're able to do, and so excited that we have this webinar today, Family Diversities and Family Demographics Across Canada. So before we begin, I want to take a moment and do a land acknowledgement. So today I am joining you from Treaty 6 in the homeland of the Métis, and I invite each of you to take a moment to pause and reflect and give thanks for all that this land has given to each and every one of us. The Saskatchewan Prevention Institute provides services to Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, and we acknowledge the various ancestral territories of the Nehiyawak, Nehinawa, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Ananeshbek, Nakaway peoples, and the homeland of the Métis. We acknowledge the treaties of these lands and reaffirm the responsibilities and commitments to healthy relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. At the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, we are committed to understanding the history of colonialism and playing a positive role in the important process of truth and reconciliation. The Prevention Institute is a nonprofit provincial organization that has been in existence for over 40 years. Our mandate is to help all children thrive through primary prevention and the promotion of well-being. We believe that all children deserve the best health possible. We have a variety of different programs, including FASD prevention, child injury prevention, child traffic safety, sexual and reproductive health, perinatal infant health, early childhood mental health, and parenting, which includes the CAPC program and the Nobody's Perfect program. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so when you signed in, you should have heard that it was being recorded, and a video link will be sent out to all registrants. It will also be available on the Prevention Institute's website. When you leave the webinar, you'll receive a prompt asking you to complete an anonymous evaluation survey. And we hope you'll just take a couple of moments because that information really helps us plan future events. Emily has graciously sent us a PDF of her slides, so I will be at the end of the presentation putting the PDF of the slides in the chat, as well as we would like for questions to be entered into the Q&A function, and at the end of the presentation we will have Emily answer the questions. If you have any problems or difficulties, please use the chat and that will be monitored and we can hopefully be able to help you. So now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Emily Kenny from Vanier Institute of the Family. Emily is a passionate advocate for community-driven work and the well-being of children and youth. Emily's primary focus at the Vanier Institute of the Family is on developing and implementing strategies to foster knowledge exchange between researchers, practitioners, and community members. And I asked her what she recently did for fun, and she's a big golfer, so I guess she went golfing before it snowed in Ottawa. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you so much for having me today. So I hope that everybody will leave this webinar with some new knowledge about the different family diversities we have in Canada, and just a better understanding of also our framework that I'll be sharing with you today. So a little bit more about me is I was previously a registered early childhood educator, still registered, but now working as a knowledge broker for the Vanier Institute. The data that I'll be presenting today will be from the new Census, as well as StatCan surveys and other research projects, just to give you a little bit of a high altitude view of areas we really need to be considering when thinking about family diversities. So I will also begin with a land acknowledgement. The Vanier Institute of the Family is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, who have protected this land since time immemorial and who will continue to live and work here today. We strive to support decolonization by amplifying voices and research that highlight the ongoing impacts of colonialism, displacement, and systemic racism on Indigenous family and community connections, cultures, and well-being. I'd also encourage everybody to please share in the chat which territory they are located on. So the Vanier Institute of the Family, who are we? We were established in 1965 as a national independent charitable organization committed to enhancing family well-being by making information about families accessible through knowledge mobilization and plain language. We are positioned at the center of networks of researchers, educators, policymakers, and organizations with an interest in families. What we do is we share evidence to strengthen the understanding of families in Canada in all their diversities and support evidence-based decisions that promote family well-being. You can see a nice picture of us there with our board members. So what I'll be talking about today will be guided by our Family Diversities Framework, which is something created by the Vanier Institute. The framework is really a way of systematically thinking about family diversities and the different inequalities that may be inherent in them. It allows us to map what is known and where the knowledge gaps exist. So as you can see, the framework views family diversity through the three separate lenses. First is family structure, second is family work, and third is family identity. Each lens focuses on a different way of seeing families, and each illuminates factors that can either enhance or detract from family well-being. It also helps to highlight our understandings where we're currently limited. What we see is family well-being is a desired outcome for all family types, and this includes material, relational, and subjective. So why is this framework important? Well, this framework is important as it is a structured way of understanding what is family diversity. It helps us to consider to what extent families in Canada are reflecting the previous ideal or nuclear family, which is really what's normalized in our policies and laws today. The framework is really focused on simplicity and understanding that there's complexity when we speak about families, and it helps us to identify where the knowledge gaps exist. As I mentioned, many of these are based around the nuclear family, and this is something that has changed in Canada, and we need to start making progress towards meeting the well-being needs of all families. For the statistics presented today, you will see that we attempted to show variations by province as they are all so unique. But what we also found was that sometimes provincial breakdowns were not always possible, but we did our best to show the diversity. So starting with a chat question, I would really love if everybody could take a second and say what comes to mind when you think about families in our society today. This can be a phrase or a word, something that stands out to you. And my hope is that by asking you this question is that we can have an opportunity to reflect on how we define family and how our society views it, and also just show the diverse perspectives of our audience today. Also gets us thinking about how our definition may have changed and what this will mean for future policies and families. So I'll just give you a minute. I can't see the chat, but I would encourage everybody to take a scroll through and just see what our other participants are talking about. So with my presentation, I'm going to start with our first lens, which is the family structure lens. This lens is really important in relation to the law, as it motivates us to look more closely at laws and policies that shape family formation and family life altogether. You can see that some of the areas listed, that there is legal involvement and legal responsibilities for family, which depend on their structure, ranging from marriage to inheritance, and the different types of families and relationships that fall into this lens. These relationships are not always recognized by family law or family policies, as I had mentioned earlier. I'd like to highlight a few of these families. They include, but do not, it's not the only families that we talk about, but they do stand out, such as polyamorous families, skip generation families, single parent families, LGBTQ plus families, as well as chosen families and Indigenous families. We like to think about the rights of these families and who has the legal right to, say, sign off on a vaccination or to go on a field trip, and this differs right across the country. What we need to be doing is, again, moving our policies and laws away from the ideal nuclear family and more towards these diverse families. This lens is particularly important as it reflects values and legislation around marriage, divorce, childbearing, economic and social responsibilities, and family structure can have consequences for legal responsibilities for children as well, including whom they can reside with and what decisions around their health and education can be. So we're going to start with some family structure statistics, again, broken down provincially, but also nationally. So we have first our married couples, which is really our first glimpse into how varied the landscape of Canadian families is. So what we found is in Nunavut, we had 48% of couples who identified as married, a number that rises to 57% in Quebec, and an impressive 88% in PEI, so quite a jump there. Again, these figures really just speak to the regional nuances and how couples choose to formalize their unions in different provinces. Turning our attention to common law, you can see that in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, 17% of census couples said they were common law, 43% were in Quebec, and 52% in Nunavut. Next, we have one-parent households, which further contribute to the mosaic of Canadian families, where in British Columbia, 15% of households were led by a single parent, where in Nunavut, this figure rises all the way to 33%. Understanding, again, the prevalence of these one-parent households is really crucial for policymakers and communities as we strive to provide the supports that they need the most. And lastly, here on the slide, we have our exploration that wouldn't be complete without acknowledging it. Of course, with this day and age, we see a prevalence of multi-generational households. So across Canada, nearly 442,000 households embrace a multi-generational structure, from 1.4% in Quebec to a significant 13.5% in Nunavut. These households, of course, are a testament of the strength of family bonds and the diverse ways in which we choose to live and support each other. So on this next slide, we're looking a little more in depth at Saskatchewan. So in the 2021 census families in Saskatchewan, there was 68.8% who were married. There's 14.1% who were common law, and 17.1% were one-parent families. An intriguing shift was also noted on the trend of adults aged 15 and over living in private households, where in 2021, 14.7% lived alone, which is a slight increase from 14.1% in 2016. In 2021, the census also captured the presence of diverse couples with 1,565 same-gender couples and 790 transgender couples. Among couples with children, 12% were step families in 2021. And this underscores the significance, again, of the complexities of family dynamics, especially when children are involved. So moving on to our second lens, the family work lens. This lens will help us to see patterns of paid and unpaid work in families. It motivates us to examine how public and workplace policies support diverse work arrangements and differential impact of these arrangements on family life. Family work takes into consideration labor force benefits, such as parental leave, and we found that there are exceptional differences provincially. Perfect. So what we found is that women are more likely than men to provide unpaid care to children and to adults. The work in the family, caring for babies, is affected by policy, as we know. When you compare it to Quebec, a province that's much more progressive, the rest of Canada, from 2005 to 2021, the percentage of fathers and second parents who took intended parental leave increased from 28% to 77% in Quebec. Whereas comparatively outside of Quebec, it ranged from 11 to 30%. We also have a research snapshot of this on our website titled Returning to Work After Childbirth. And it just goes over, again, this unbalanced family work life. So looking at the statistics of family work, we found that in 1976, 40.5% of mothers were employed, whereas 78% of mothers aged 3 to 5 were employed in 2019, ranging from 75% in Manitoba and 82% in Quebec. By 2021, this had increased to 76.5%. Of course, as mentioned, fathers had less variation in their employment rate over time, where the rate was at 93.3% in 1976 and decreased just slightly to 92.2% by 2019. This is believed to be mostly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and their employment rate, fell to 89.4%, but recovered back to 91% in 2021. So with a glimpse into the world of unpaid caregivers, these remarkable individuals are driven by compassion and contribute significantly to the well-being of loved ones. According to recent data, the breakdown of caregiving responsibilities is as followed in the slide. So you will see that 53% spouse or partner were in charge of caregiving, 18% friend or neighbor, 15% were other family members, 14% were adult childs, 12% were siblings, 7% were siblings. Sorry, my apologies. These figures really just show, again, the diverse relationships and how we are reaching out to those around us for support when needed. Transitioning to a more cultural context, it's important to recognize that within Indigenous communities, care work holds immense value. Many elders express a desire to spend their days at home, emphasizing that the importance of preserving cultural practices and staying connected to their roots helps to bring to the forefront the critical need for workplace accommodations and a robust support system that acknowledges and respects these cultural values. Astonishingly, 16% of the labor force engages in complex mobility for work.
Emily,
yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Good to continue?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we found is for complex mobility that 16% of the labor force engages in. So complex mobility is irregular hours, traveling for long days. It can also include military families who are not around. Of course, this would create a work-life imbalance, whereas one of the family members would be in charge of the caretaking. Oops. Next slide. So looking at Saskatchewan, we found that 86% of mothers and children aged 4 to 5 participated in the paid labor market. And this was tied with Quebec, actually. So it's the only province with a higher rate was PEI. So moving on to our third and final lens, we have the family identity lens. This lens allows us to see how families view themselves and how they're perceived and represented by others. It really matters because family identity creates a sense of belonging in a larger community with which families can share common features, experiences, etc. However, sometimes these identities can be imposed on families in ways that can create a stigma and lead to marginalization as well as exclusion. So as we have listed here, they include habits, rituals, traditions, characteristics, how families view themselves, how they get a sense of belonging within their community, and how they perceive and represent themselves. So looking again back at statistics, beginning with a small snapshot of the Indigenous identity. A noteworthy 5% of the population identifies as Indigenous. This is national, ranging from 2.2% in PEI and 85.8% in Nunavut. Within the Indigenous population, 60% report as First Nations identity, 36% identify as Métis, and 4% identify as Inuit. Canada is really well known for its welcoming stance on immigration, where it sees nearly 1/4 of its population. Sorry, 1 second. 1/4 of its population, precisely 23%, are born outside of its borders. This percentage varies from 3.2% in Nunavut to a substantial 30% in Ontario. These diverse backgrounds really contribute to our cultural fabric and really, again, helps to define our nation and the families we have within it. Embracing racial diversity is really the cornerstone of Canada's identity, with a 27% of the population identifying as racialized, meaning that they belong to a group designated as visible minorities. So shifting our focus, we're going to explore the diversity within relationships, looking at the almost 128,000 couples, comprising of 1.5% of the population, who identify as same gender, transgender, or non-binary. Interestingly, where most of these couples have found their homes is in the downtowns of Toronto, Vancouver, Quebec, and Montreal. So right now, about 5% of our population is Indigenous. And even though it's just 5%, it really accounts for 7.7% of the children. So less than 15 years old. And that really shows you that we have a younger population than Canada overall in terms of Indigenous children. And what's also quite staggering is that half of the children in foster care are actually identifying as Indigenous, which is something we really need to consider in our efforts to meet the TRC goals and make policy changes to better support these communities. So taking another closer look at Saskatchewan, according to the 2021 census, 12.5% of the population were foreign-born immigrants, 86.1% were Canadian-born non-immigrants, and 1.4% were non-permanent residents. 31.3% of the immigrant population arrived between 2016 and 2021, with 43,120 arriving between that time. The top 3 places of birth among the immigrants who live in Saskatchewan in 2021 were Philippines, India, and China. So we have a slide dedicated just to the Indigenous people of Saskatchewan because there is such a high percentage of them in the population, where there is 187,890 Indigenous people in Saskatchewan, which makes up 17% of the population. So quite high. The majority of the Indigenous population reported as a single Indigenous identity, which was either First Nations, Métis, or Inuk or Inuit. Of the Indigenous population in Saskatchewan, 64.5% were First Nations people, 33.4% were Métis, and 0.2% were Inuit or Inuk. Within the First Nations population, 91.5% registered or treaty Indian status, as defined under the Indian Act. The other 8.5% of First Nations population did not have registered or treaty Indian status. In addition to those who reported a single Indigenous identity, 2,025 people reported more than one Indigenous identity, and 1,425 were defined as an Indigenous identity that was included elsewhere. So just taking a look at our final piece, which is family well-being, we have it broken down into 3 subsections, where we have material, what families have, income, food, shelter. relational, family, social connections, social support, how well family members get along, and subjective, so family's sense of belonging, their goals, how they feel they're doing compared to others in their communities. So looking at material well-being, we found that in Quebec, 6% of households face core housing needs, where in Nunavut, this figure drastically rises to 32.9%. In the Northwest Territories, 7.2% of households are below after-tax low-income measure. In Newfoundland and Labrador, the percentage is notably higher at 15.2%, and Saskatchewan is sitting at 13.3%, living at or below the low-income after-tax measure. In Canada, in total, it sits at 11.1%. The regional disparities in housing and income are quite evident, and we can see that policy interventions are needed to be region-specific for a more equitable Canada. We also see that food insecurity is a growing global concern, and that affects 1 in every 8 households in Canada. Living in a non-food secure home can affect more than just your physical and mental health outcomes for just children and adults. Adults are often seen to sacrifice their own nutrition to help protect their children. While this may protect their children, of course, we know that this has an impact on their mental health and well-being, which ultimately will be vulnerable to the psychological effects of living in a non-food secure home. So here we have the Saskatchewan statistics for material well-being, where we found 7.5% of the population aged 12 and older reported experiencing household food insecurity in 2020. The median after-tax income of the households in Saskatchewan was $73,000 in 2020, which is a slight change of 2.8% from $71,000 in 2015. The home ownership rate in Saskatchewan was quite high at 70.7% in 2021. So looking at the final 2 points of well-being, we have relational and subjective. So as the slide reveals, a significant majority of women and men, 77% and 74%, respectively expressed that they always had somebody to count on. So this again underscores the importance of our social connections and how we create these support systems can really improve our mental health and well-being. When we think about family well-being, we have to consider, of course, both the positive and negative outcomes. So although intimate partner violence is an issue across the country, we do see quite a variation by geographic region. The statistics reveal that in Ontario, the rate of police-reported intimate partner violence stands at 251 victims per 100,000 people. Unfortunately, in Nunavut, this figure really skyrockets, where there's more than 20 times higher, reaching 5,249 victims per 100,000 people. Again, this is just highlighting the need for attention and resources and collective efforts to help address and rectify these disparities. Oops. On a brighter note, despite these challenges that some regions are facing more so than others, there is a substantial proportion of Canadians that express satisfaction in the time spent with their families. So an impressive 85% find the quality of time spent with families to be satisfying, while 80% are content with the amount of time devoted to family activities. Again, speaking to the resilience and adaptability of Canadian families and how we are able to move among life's complexities. So I have a poll question for you. Hopefully that wasn't information overload. I know it can feel like that. We will be sharing these slides with you at the end of the presentation. So what I'd like you to select is, when you think about family diversity and the lenses, which aspect resonated with you the most? I'll put them up on the screen. I don't expect everybody to fully remember them. I can see that family identity is at 15%. Great. This will also help us to tailor our future knowledge products so that we can really interact with you guys on what it is you're interested in hearing more about. Great. So family identity is still in the lead. What I will say is that family identity encompasses cultural, ethnic, and LGBTQ identities, where families today often embrace and celebrate unique identities, fostering a sense of belonging and pride. For instance, families that actively engage in preserving and passing on cultural traditions, which of course we see a lot of in the Indigenous culture. Moreover, families with LGBTQ plus members navigate and embrace their identities, promoting acceptance, understanding within the family unit and the broader society. Great, thank you everyone for participating. And this is just to wrap up. We made a really good time. So again, just some highlights as we bring our discussion to a close. We want to reflect on the key takeaways from the new census data, a valuable snapshot, of course, of social, economic, and ethnocultural fabric across our provinces. The census data really acts as a mirror, reflecting the intricate tapestry of our society, where Nunavut in particular really emerged as a distant focal point with statistics that were often in stark contrast from the other regions. Marriage rates to intimate partner violence and multi-generational households were quite high. Of course, we see that there is a shift of the impact on family due to COVID-19, and it's not only altered our daily lives, but reshaped patterns of family work and health. As we navigate these changes, we of course need to remain in tune to the implications for family well-being and continually adapt the support systems that are needed based on our provinces and regions. So we see a structured approach to understanding family diversities allows us not only to celebrate where families are thriving, but also identify these disparities and address the knowledge gaps, whether that's through acknowledging the values embedded in Indigenous cultures or recognizing unseen work of unpaid caregivers. These structured lenses will help us to craft solutions that are both inclusive and effective. So that brings me to my final slide. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have a QR code in the corner here for our resources page on the Vanier website, where you'll find tons of research snapshots, articles, fact sheets, and more. If anybody has any further questions, please reach out to me. I will do my best to answer in a timely fashion. The Vanier Institute also has a newsletter and a link tree where we share most of our recent publications as well as promote relevant family research articles and conferences. I will drop these into the chat. And if anybody has any questions now, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for that wonderful presentation. Lots of information. It does feel a little bit overwhelming when you start thinking numbers, and you and I had spoken about this prior to, but the information is so incredibly valid. I think when you're working with families, just having that information to do the work, but if you're doing any sort of reporting, requesting for funding, all of these type of statistics are definitely vital for us. So we currently don't have any questions. If there is anybody,
we're taking it all in.
yeah. So I have shared in the chat the slides that Emily shared with us.
Perfect.
Because I think that there definitely is some things that are to be reflected on. Yeah, and Connie just posted in the chat too. I think this is really important information for all our agencies to use in reporting, and I agree. We have one question here. Are there any policies that might be recommended by the Vanier Institute for Saskatchewan, in particular to address disparities shown by the data?
Yeah, so what we do at the Vanier Institute is we're not ones who write policies or make recommendations. We really just collect the data. So what we would do is collect all the data to show, for example, the high number of Indigenous community members and share that with our policymakers so that they can understand why there is such a disparity between, say, Saskatchewan and Ontario, and how they can go about fixing that. So really what we work as is as an in-between. People come to us with their questions, or we seek out the people who we think need to know this information and share it in a plain language format for everybody to understand.
I know
So
you also, sorry, Emily, you had also indicated beforehand. Yeah, great. So you've put all of your links available, and I know that you had shared with me prior to that if people do have follow-up questions at any point, or they want maybe some more specific data, that they could reach out to you. And I really appreciate we had that conversation about taking those statistics and really trying to plain language it, because there is so much in order to try to absorb for our own work. So
definitely. And like I said, this presentation was really chock full of data. And I know it can seem like a lot trying to squeeze all that information into such a short period of time. So if you have questions or something comes up, you want more clarification, I can send you the links as well to where the data came from, how we collected it, different resources that relate to it if you're interested in more. Again, on the Vanier website, we have tons of resources. We'll be coming out with new publications, as I mentioned. Weekly, we have them coming out. But if you sign up to the mailing list, you'll get them every month. And if you sign up to the link tree, you'll get them as we publish them.
great.
Well, thank you everybody for joining and for listening. And I hope everybody has a lot of trick-or-treaters tonight. A nice, safe Halloween for everyone.
Yes, thank you, Emily, very much for joining us. I was sharing with her before, I was not thinking about October 31st being a Halloween when we originally picked this date. So definitely appreciate everybody's time. And as I mentioned before, we will be sending out the recording link, and it will be on our website. So feel free to share this with any of your colleagues or other people that you think may be interested in some of this data as well. So yeah, Emily, I don't know if you can see all the chats, but there's many thank yous,
Yes,
lots
thank
of
you,
information to absorb. So yeah, this is great.
Great. Well,
You for
thank
your
you so much for
time.
having me today. And again,
And for all participants, just a reminder to just check out the Learning Opportunities section on the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute's website for upcoming webinars. We are planning some for the end of November, just don't have the link available quite yet, but hopefully we'll have that up very soon. So again, thank you, Emily. It's been a true pleasure meeting with you and having this opportunity to work together, and I look forward to future endeavors together.
yes, me as well. Thank you, Jackie.
Take care.
You as
Bye-bye.
well.